Britain has seen brutal winters. Britain has seen record lows. But there's one stretch of January 1987 that people still talk about the way you talk about a power cut that lasted too long, or a storm that rewired your memory. Because this wasn't just cold nights. This was the kind of cold that stole the daytime. The kind of cold where snow didn't fall like a postcard. It attacked in bands, kept coming, and then sat there, unchanged, because the air was too cold to let it melt. 1987 did not produce the UK's all-time lowest temperature. The coldest temperature on record is even lower in other years. But January 1987 delivered something different, something that felt worse to a huge chunk of the country. A deep freeze that made ordinary life collapse, especially across southern and southeastern England, and even into the southwest, areas that normally rely on the sea to keep winter mild. And for many people, the most shocking part wasn't a dramatic headline. It was looking at the clock at lunchtime and realising the day never warmed up. So let's rewind to how Britain got there. Most winters in Britain are a negotiation between land and ocean. The Atlantic sends mild air. The sea softens extremes. Even when it's cold, it often flips back. But every so often, the pattern locks into something dangerous, a prolonged easterly flow. Cold air doesn't just drift in, it pours in, day after day, as if someone opened a door to the interior of Europe and forgot to close it. That's what happened in early January 1987. And here's why this matters. Cold air from the east can be very dry until it crosses the North Sea, because the North Sea is not just water, it's fuel. When bitter air sweeps over relatively warmer sea, it picks up moisture. It becomes unstable. And then, as it hits land, that moisture turns into snow, sometimes not as a gentle blanket, but as concentrated, relentless snow shower lines. In simple terms, Britain didn't just get cold. Britain got cold and got the wrong kind of snow. If you've ever watched a weather radar and seen a thin line of showers that just sits over one area, you know how unfair weather can be. One town gets chaos. 10 miles away, someone's walking the dog like it's normal. Southeast England, especially around Kent and the Thames estuary, is notorious for this in the right wind. And on one key day, January 12, 1987, the southeast was hit by persistent heavy snow showers that stacked up fast. Not a few centimetres. We're talking about snow deep enough to change your sense of distance. Deep enough to make roads vanish into a white surface where you couldn't tell what was pavement and what was field. Deep enough that a journey you do in 20 minutes can turn into hours, or simply becomes impossible. Now picture the human scale of that. A morning that starts normal. A forecast that sounds serious, but you've heard those before. Then you step outside, and the cold bites in a way you don't expect. The air feels heavy, sharp, like it's cutting your lungs. And the snow isn't drifting gently down. It's being driven. It comes sideways, thrown by the wind, and it keeps coming in bursts that look almost like smoke in the streetlights. This is when Britain starts to do what it always does in extreme weather. It improvises. People walk when buses can't move. Neighbours push cars they don't own. Shops sell out of basics because everyone has the same idea at the same time. Stock up because tomorrow might be worse. And in January 1987, tomorrow often was worse. Here's a term that sounds technical, but feels personal the moment you live through it. An ice day. That's a day when the temperature stays below freezing for the full 24 hours. No thaw, no relief, no softening. Just cold that sits on the country like a weight. And once you stack ice days together, everything changes. Wet surfaces never dry. Slush becomes solid. Snow becomes compacted. Then it becomes a surface, hard, polished, dangerous. And at that point, a minor fall can break a wrist. A small leak can become a burst pipe. A short drive can become a stranded night. In parts of southern Britain during this cold spell, There were days when the temperature barely moved, even with daylight. That is psychologically brutal, because daylight is supposed to be the reset. Daylight is supposed to be when the world gives you a break. But in January 1987, daylight often showed you the same frozen scene you went to sleep with. The Thames estuary effect, why some places got buried. Let's zoom in on the geography that made this event legendary. Kent, Essex, areas around the Thames estuary. These places can be especially vulnerable to snow showers when the wind is coming from the east or northeast, bringing air in from the North Sea. And in this kind of setup, snow can fall in persistent lines, almost like a conveyor belt. You don't get one burst and then it moves on. You get a system that keeps reloading. This is how you end up with shocking depth differences across short distances. One neighbourhood gets winter, another gets a historic event. And for people living in those hardest hit bands, the world becomes quiet in the strangest way. Because deep snow changes sound. Traffic disappears. Footsteps become muffled. Even voices feel smaller. The landscape becomes white, but the sky often stays grey, and the wind keeps reminding you, this isn't peaceful. This is pressure. But Britain is an island. Shouldn't the sea save us? Normally, yes. That's why the next part is so important. January 1987 didn't just hit the southeast. It produced extraordinary cold even in the southwest, one of the mildest regions in the British Isles, where the ocean usually prevents truly extreme temperatures. But when a strong, cold, easterly wind pushes out the usual Atlantic flow, the southwest loses its shield. And suddenly, places that normally stay above freezing are waking up to temperatures that feel wrong. Wrong for the region, wrong for the memory, the kind of cold that makes even coastal air feel hostile. And once the southwest is freezing too, it tells you how deep this cold pool really is. This wasn't just a cold corner. This was a national scale pattern that overpowered what usually protects the country. Every major cold spell has a moment where one reading becomes a symbol, a number that gets repeated because it's hard to believe. During the January 1987 spell, Britain recorded an extremely low temperature that placed it among the coldest readings in the modern record books. And when temperatures drop that far, the cold becomes more than discomfort. It becomes infrastructure failure. Metal contracts, rubber hardens, batteries weaken, engines struggle. Anything involving water becomes a risk. You don't just worry about staying warm, you worry about the hidden disasters. A boiler that won't restart, a pipe you don't notice until it bursts, a freezer-like kitchen, an elderly neighbour you haven't seen today. And this is where winter becomes a social event, not in a fun way, but in the way disasters always do. Because in extreme cold, people survive better together. Someone has a shovel, someone has extra blankets, someone knows which roads are passable. Someone checks on the house at the end of the street with the lights still off. What a day like that feels like, minute by minute. Morning. You look out the window and you can't tell where the road ends. The light is flat. The world looks unfinished. You step outside and the cold grabs exposed skin instantly. Your breath doesn't just fog, it pours out. And the snow underfoot doesn't crunch like fresh powder. It squeaks. Because it's so cold, the crystals behave differently. Midday. This is the part people remember, because midday is when your body expects a temperature lift. But on the worst days of this spell, midday felt like someone lied about the sun. You're walking in daylight and it still feels like night cold. Your hands start to ache inside gloves. Your face goes numb in wind. You start timing your outdoor moments like you're budgeting pain. Evening. Now the fear shifts, because once the sun goes, you know the cold is going to sharpen again. And if you've got snow piled high, and your street hasn't been cleared, night makes everything feel isolated. Streetlights turn the snow orange. The world feels smaller, and the silence gets deeper. That's when people in 1987 would do the same ritual. Check the heating, check the taps, check the weather forecast, and then hope the next day doesn't bring more. Why 1987 stuck in the national memory? Here's the reason this cold spell is still famous. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just snow. It was the combination, plus timing, plus geography. When heavy snow hits the southeast of England, it disrupts a dense network of commuting routes. When extreme cold hits the southwest, it shocks regions that don't usually experience it. When an ice day pattern persists, it turns a weather event into a life event. And that's why people still name it, because Britain has lots of chilly winters, but it doesn't always get a winter that rewrites normal life across such a wide area so quickly. Coldest day ever. How to say it honestly and make it hit harder. So how do you keep the punch of your title without losing credibility? You frame it like this. January 1987 delivered one of the coldest days many parts of Britain had experienced in modern times, especially in the south and southwest. Because the cold didn't just arrive overnight, it took the daytime too. And that is what makes it terrifying. Not just the number on a thermometer at dawn, but the fact that the country couldn't warm up even when the day was supposed to help. If you want a final thought that lands, make it human. Because the weather story isn't really about air pressure or wind direction. It's about what happens when normal systems fail and people are forced back into something older. Community, improvisation, grit. January 1987 showed Britain something simple. Your routine is more fragile than you think. A few days of the wrong wind can shut roads, freeze homes, and turn short journeys into risks. But it also showed something else, something worth ending on. When winter hits hard enough, the country stops pretending it's invincible and starts acting like a neighbourhood again. People check on each other. They share what they have. They adapt. And maybe that's why this cold spell still lives in memory. Because for a brief time in January 1987, Britain wasn't just cold. Britain was tested. And it held, one frozen day at a time.